It was a Tuesday. The kind of crystalline September morning that makes New Yorkers forget why they ever complain about the weather. Coffee shops were brewing their usual blends, subway turnstiles were clicking their familiar rhythm, and somewhere in Lower Manhattan, a janitor named William Rodriguez was starting what he thought would be just another ordinary day cleaning the North Tower of the World Trade Center. He had no way of knowing that by evening, his name would be etched in history as one of the last people to escape the building alive. Because sometimes, the most extraordinary moments in human history begin with the most mundane Tuesday morning routines. At 8:46 a.m., 19 men with box cutters would transform a beautiful September day into the most documented tragedy in human history. But this isn't really a story about terrorists or politics or the grand sweep of geopolitical change. This is about the barista who served her last cup of coffee at Windows on the World, the firefighter who climbed stairs he knew he might never descend, and the passengers on Flight 93 who chose to rewrite the ending of their own story. It's about how ordinary people faced the unthinkable, and how a nation discovered that heroism often wears the uniform of a first responder, or sometimes, no uniform at all. The morning of September 11th, 2001, began like any other for most Americans. Kevin Cosgrove, an insurance executive, kissed his wife goodbye and caught his usual train to work at the South Tower. Betty Ong, a flight attendant, was working American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles, probably looking forward to the California sunshine. In Shanksville, Pennsylvania, farmers were checking their fields, completely unaware that their quiet countryside would soon become a battleground where heroes chose death over submission. The first sign that this Tuesday was different came at 8:46 a.m., when American Airlines Flight 11 struck the North Tower. For a brief, surreal moment, many witnesses assumed it was an accident, a terrible, tragic accident, but an accident nonetheless. Tom Burnett's father was watching the news coverage when his son called from United Flight 93. "Dad," Tom said, with the kind of calm that comes from accepting the unacceptable, "I think we're being hijacked." It was the first of several calls that would break a nation's heart and rebuild its faith in human courage simultaneously. Inside the towers, ordinary office workers became reluctant heroes simply by helping their colleagues reach the stairs. Wells Crowther, a 24-year-old equities trader, led groups of people to safety wearing his signature red bandana until the South Tower collapsed around him. He saved at least 18 lives and became known as the Man in the Red Bandana, a title that somehow captures both the randomness and the profound dignity of heroism in extremity. The firefighters of New York City faced an impossible choice that morning, and they chose to climb. The FDNY lost 343 members on September 11th, but the number doesn't capture the individual decisions each man made to grab their gear, to enter buildings that were already burning, to continue climbing even as others fled downward. Captain J. Jonas and his company were descending stairwell B in the North Tower when they encountered Josephine Harris, a bookkeeper who couldn't keep up. They could have left her behind and saved themselves. Instead, they slowed their pace to match hers. When the tower collapsed, their position in the stairwell, determined by their refusal to abandon a stranger, created a pocket of survival that saved all their lives. Meanwhile, 37,000 feet above Pennsylvania, the passengers of United Flight 93 were having conversations that would echo through history. Todd Beamer's "Let's Roll" became a rallying cry, but what's often forgotten is the quiet planning that preceded those famous words. The passengers had learned from phone calls that this wasn't a traditional hijacking. The planes were being used as weapons. Jeremy Glick, a former college rugby player, told his wife that he and others were going to do something about their situation. These weren't trained soldiers or action heroes. They were a software salesman, a medical devices executive, a flight attendant who loved gardening. They were us, in other words, facing a situation none of us can truly imagine. The collapse of the towers created scenes that still seem impossible to process fully. People covered in gray dust wandered through streets that looked like a nuclear winter had descended on Manhattan. Yet amid the apocalyptic imagery, there were countless small acts of kindness, strangers helping strangers walk, restaurants giving away free food and water, boat captains spontaneously organizing the largest maritime evacuation since Dunkirk to ferry people away from lower Manhattan. Perhaps most remarkably, the day revealed how quickly the familiar can become foreign. Phone calls that began with routine check-ins. "Hi honey, just wanted to let you know my plane is delayed," became final conversations. The Twin Towers, which had stood like bookends holding up the Manhattan skyline for 30 years, were gone by lunchtime, leaving a wound in the skyline that seemed to gape like a missing tooth. The psychological landscape shifted just as dramatically. Airport security lines that had once been casual affairs became elaborate rituals of suspicion. The phrase "never forget" appeared on everything from bumper stickers to memorial tattoos, as if the collective memory of that day required constant reinforcement against the natural human tendency to heal and move forward. Children who were in elementary school that day would grow up in a world where removing shoes at airports was normal, where 9/11 was a date that needed no year attached, where the phrase post-9/11 world became shorthand for a fundamental before and after in American consciousness. They would inherit a country that had learned, in the span of a single morning, that even the most powerful nation on earth was not immune to 19 men with a plan and an ideology that valued death over life. Yet for all the changes that followed, the wars, the security apparatus, the cultural shift toward viewing the world as a more dangerous place, what endures most powerfully from that day are the individual stories of human decency under pressure. The people who chose to help rather than flee, to comfort rather than panic, to call their loved ones not to say goodbye but to say I love you, as if love itself was the most important message to send into an uncertain future. As you settle into sleep tonight, remember that September 11th ultimately became a story about how ordinary people respond to extraordinary circumstances. In the span of 102 minutes, from the first impact to the collapse of the second tower, thousands of people made split-second decisions that revealed the very best of human nature alongside its very worst. The janitor William Rodriguez used his master key to help firefighters navigate the North Tower, saving countless lives before escaping just moments before the collapse. The businessmen and women of Flight 93 held a vote, an actual democratic vote, before deciding to storm the cockpit. Even in their final moments, they remained fundamentally, beautifully American. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities for both heroism and cowardice, new tests of our capacity to choose hope over fear. But tonight, as you drift towards sleep, take comfort in knowing that when the unthinkable happened, when evil tried to break the spirit of an entire nation, the response was not despair but defiance, not hatred but an overwhelming display of love for strangers. That, perhaps, is the most important thing to remember about the day that changed the world. It didn't change who we are at our core. It simply revealed it more clearly than ever before.